This is going to be my presentation on the four causes and intelligent design. So, what I mean by causes here, it's not the conventional way that we tend to think of the term cause. It's a little more expanded. It is an Aristotelian concept. It shows up in Aristotle's work. The four causes are specific explanations of every single object in the universe. This is important because some of these will intuitively seem more like man-made tools. They're explanations for manufactured objects. The four causes are meant to explain every object, natural and manufactured. So that is the material, formal, efficient, and final. So starting with the material cause, it's probably the most intuitive, or one of the two more intuitive causes from the modern perspective. It's just the physical composition and substance of the object. We can think of these as particles and atoms. It can be various compounds, etc. The formal cause is the metaphysical constitution and structural essence of an object. So that can be geometry, its spatial extension, and the forms are general, but they're also for very specific objects. So this can be incredibly complex shapes and structures that cause a specific object to be one object and not another. So another fairly intuitive cause here is the efficient cause. So this is the direct sequence of events and the process in time leading up to the emergence of an object. So it is just the necessary prerequisite events that cause an object to exist, whatever chain that is, that brings about an object in time. And the final cause. This is not a product of these former processes. This is actually the purpose of an object. Each object has a purpose in Aristotle's view, and each object has something that it is meant for. So, to use a more organic example, because I do think that generally we think of purpose as only being in man-made objects, and to an extent, the efficient cause has this problem as well, where we imagine a person being responsible for consciously making something like a hammer or a chair. And I think it's important because Aristotle intended these causes to apply to all objects. It is important to give organic examples in nature of the final cause and efficient cause. So we can think of that as evolution for the efficient cause, and the final cause would be its purpose. So we evolved eyelashes to protect our eyes, for example, or a fingernail would be a specific kind of tool with a specific kind of purpose. The purpose of that object was not an accidental byproduct of random evolution, but there was a purpose that had existed before the fingernail, and then the organism developed it to fulfill that purpose, and not necessarily consciously on the part of the organism, but still there was some kind of necessity and therefore purpose in nature. And so every object organically in the universe has these four causes. Every object has composition, it has structure. It was brought into existence via a moving process, and it moves towards, in a process, its final destination. So how do the four causes relate to evolution? Well, the material and efficient causes are responsible for the situation leading up to the specific instantiation of a being in nature. And the formal and final causes are necessary for every being to be specifically that being and not another one. It's what is essentially a specific being's nature. Together, the evolutionary situation and the essential being make up the organism as we know it. We can also think about the material and formal cause working together to form specific objects just in the moment that they appear to us, but explaining them within the context of time and to every other object. We can use the efficient and final causes to explain them in this way, to put them in that larger context. So if everything within the sequence of time can be traced back to its prior efficient cause, then eventually all things will be traced back to a singular cause by virtue of existing within the same physical space. This is at the very least the logical underpinning of a theory like the Big Bang or the creation myth of Genesis, or really any religious creation myth, is that there is a source of efficient causes. The formal causes also have a singular origin point by virtue of being interconnected. I explain a little more in depth on how the forms are interconnected in my video, Copyright in the Realm of Forms. But to go into it a little bit, forms are interconnected because every object in the universe has a structure, but those structures themselves relate to each other in more and more general forms of their essence. And so you can think about the pyramids in Egypt as being contingent on certain mathematical principles, let's say pyramids in the abstract, and then the geometry of the pyramid in turn requires more universal principles, let's say the number 3, and then further more fundamental, more necessary objects like multiplicity and unity, that 3 objects can exist together as some kind of set. A set of 3. So that's unity and multiplicity at the fundamental level. And eventually, because all objects share a physical and metaphysical space, all objects then are contingent on an absolutely necessary object, the real, the one, whatever you want to call that. But it is the essence of being, what it means for a thing to be rather than not to be. It would have to be contingent on this most fundamental form. So in that way, all formal causes go back to the one as well as efficient causes. And it's fair to say that this singular being then gave the universe purpose. Because if it brings all forms into existence, it imbues each form with its final cause, before the form even comes into the physical world through efficient causes. It could be helpful to think of the formal cause containing the final cause, so the form of an object contains its purpose in the structure, but the structure of a shovel or claws or sex organs aren't forms for their own sake. They are contingent on their purpose. They form because of their purpose, just do something specifically in this world. So in that sense, the final cause is actually the first cause in a certain sense. The purpose is what brings all objects into their place. Now, all matter, all material causes are contained within one space as well, called the universe. And the universe is really good at recycling and being parsimonious. Because of that, matter is known for not being able to be destroyed or created out of thin air. It's actually only ever recycled, along with energy. So all 4 causes do seem to be monopolized by a singular being. And I have a quick side tangent, because I can't help but to associate this concept of the forms and the 4 causes with another concept in mathematics and theoretical physics called Hilbert space. As it pertains to quantum physics, Hilbert space is the theoretical space that contains wave functions. Wave functions are mathematical objects that describe physical systems, and when an object is in a superposition, meaning that it is not in position A or B yet, or at least it has not been observed in position A or B, it is assumed to be in a superposition where it is in neither state or in both simultaneously. But it's not meant to be taken, from my understanding, it's not meant to be taken like that the object is literally in 2 states at once, but it is actually in a kind of third space where the wave function hasn't collapsed, meaning that the information describing that object actually describes all possible positions that object could be in. So their mathematical properties are distributed into all possible states. And I'll try to explain the significance of this a bit later in this video. So we can think of the Garden of Eden in Genesis as the space containing all possible organisms and organic structures, not at the beginning of time, right? Like not an actual space at the beginning of the temporal dimension, but actually outside of a temporal sequence, more as an ontological prior to physical organisms. So it is kind of the space that holds all nature. It's more fundamental than time and space, which are just relationships between objects, and then it actually structures the sequence of time and space logically to fit in all of these beings, all of these forms. This, to me, is the more coherent way to see Eden, rather than something that contains all organisms as they currently are at the beginning of time, because we do observe organisms to change gradually through mutation. However, the mutations that work themselves are preordained, and I will go into that concept in just a second here. If there is kind of these created archetypes imbued with purpose, then how do they meet evolution? How do we combine these two theories? The purpose, like I said before, of an object is presupposed in the object's form and actually determines how any object is formed. So it's teleology, it's the zenith, the fully realized version of an object is in fact preordained. It already exists within this Eden space, and all possible contexts that it exists in are also predetermined in a sense. Then evolution can be interpreted as not a random series of events leading to increasingly complex beings, but actually as those already complex beings sort of descending down. And this is a bit hard to explain because we tend to think of things developing linearly from, or I should say chronologically, from basic to complex. But in this model, the complex was already created and then necessitates more primitive states to sort of logically place themselves within a logical sequence of events. So the complex requires building blocks by virtue of being made up of multiple things. We have to see the development of single-celled life, for example, in order for there to be multicellular, social, intelligent, creative beings. But the teleology, the purpose of life, is to be complex and creative and social and to cooperate and form ecosystems and whatnot. So the more basic forms of life just sort of lay down the groundwork for the complex beings like human beings to manifest in the material realm. They already existed perfectly in the realm of forms and just had to descend and sort of meet evolution halfway, so to speak. I think it's also important to point out the fact that we are not done evolving, and we could very well slip into a sort of devolution and miss our mark, our potential zenith as a species. And both options, the perfect being and the denigrated one, are both real in a sense. Just because they don't exist in the physical world as we currently experience it right now, that doesn't mean it's not possible. That doesn't mean it's not a real mathematical object in a sense. Both are actual alternatives parallel to each other, and it is in a sort of way up to us what archetype we would like to move closer to, because both of them are real. Heaven and hell, in a manner of speaking, are both real at the same time, and we can degenerate or we can regenerate our telos. So this is kind of a fun example of these Platonic forms in evolutionary biology that is it's just obvious. We've known about it for quite a long time. And it is the phenomena of convergent evolution. It is a process where multiple life forms with different origins evolve into similar body shapes, implying that those body shapes existed prior as pure information and activate or congeal matter into specific structures under specific conditions. So I thought that was kind of interesting, maybe illustrative of this argument. But yeah, I think that for now, this is all I really have to say about the topic of creationism or evolution. In a sense, it's kind of both. The created world as pure information had to have existed prior. What makes something possible had to exist before it was, quote unquote, actual. But of course, every possible structure is in a sense actual, and our experience of one particular structure in space and time doesn't actually prioritize that structure as being like ontologically primary. Like if we experience a certain timeline, that doesn't mean, or a certain place in space, that doesn't mean we're necessarily the center of the universe. Like we're on Earth, that doesn't mean that the Earth is the center of the universe. We're in this timeline, that doesn't mean that this is the only timeline. We just tend to favor the situation we're in specifically as an epistemological jumping off point because our perspective is limited. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other possibilities that existed prior to us coming into existence, even other humans, because like I said before, human beings had to have been possible before they were actual. So given the fact that there could very well be an infinite amount of time and space, there can be other humanoids, right? Through convergent evolution, or there could be just other humans. Because we have that much space and time to work with. And the human form is a real structure. And so in that sense, creationism has some water to it, even if we see changes happen in time on this specific planet. That still doesn't mean that there's not an intelligent designer with creativity and purpose imbuing the world with purpose in the evolutionary process and directing it. Because after all, if there was a God, it would be all-powerful, all-knowing, and all good. And so being able to know all possibilities is a part of that. Even the less than perfect possibilities have to still play themselves out in a time and space. That's really all I have to say on this for now. Take care.